Hi everyone and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. This is our first session. In this session we will learn about the XPath itself. So let's begin. As automation engineer, when you're working on Selenium or Playwright or APM scripts, the first thing you need to do is that you need to locate the element uniquely. Now you might be using the ID, class, name, but what happens if these ID names are not reliable? Or if they are dynamic in nature, then what happens? So basically, here XPath gives a flexibility to handle such kind of scenarios. Now, what is XPath? So when you talk about XPath is basically an XML path language. So it's basically XML path, XML path language, right? And here, what is XML? So XML is basically extendable markup language. Let me go to the browser and show you. So XML is basically extensible markup language, and that's how it looks like. So you have a node, inside that you have this to, then inside the node you have from, inside the node you have heading. So that's how it looks like, right? And now let's go back to the notepad. So it's basically XML path language. Now what kind of a language it is? So this is basically a query language. So which means that this language will help to query something. Now what you need to query? So basically it is designed to navigate or select nodes / values from XML or HTML documents. So this means that this XPath, which is basically XML path query language, this language will help to navigate through the nodes or values from the XML or the HTML documents. Now, let's understand in a very simple way. On the daily basis, you might be using the Google Maps, right? So Google Maps help you to navigate from your current location to a specific address. Now, how it do? Basically, it will navigate you from different streets, intersection, landmarks, and eventually it will take you to the destination. XPath uses a similar path-like syntax to traverse through the structure of markup documents. So markup documents here, we are talking about XML and HTML documents, right? Now, when we talk about this XPath, we just talked about nodes, right? So what are these nodes over here? So basically, just like in Google Maps, if you go to the Google Maps, so Google Maps show you different, buildings, parks, restaurants, everything in the city. So these building blocks, like restaurant, parks, buildings, everything. So these are basically the nodes. So in HTML documents, if you see any kind of a tag like div, title, so these are the elements. If you see something attribute like class equals to header, again this is an attribute node. Okay, so there are different kind of a nodes in the HTML document. So if I go back to this browser and just right click on this one, go to inspect this one. So basically you see that is a tree like structure. So you need to go from first you start from the HTML, then go to the header, body, div, and so on. Right? So if you look into this one, so these are basically the nodes. So div is the node, right? If there's a class attribute over here, like this one, so this is again a node. So in order to traverse through this particular HTML from here to here, if you want to find some particular element, right, you need to traverse through, you need to navigate to that particular element. And in order to navigate to that particular element, for example, if you want to navigate to the sign in button, so you need to go to this particular HTML, right? And XPath will help you to navigate to that particular element here. Now, in terms of the nodes, we have different node types. So node types. So the first one is basically the element nodes, and it's like in the HTML we have div. So you see these kind of tags, div. We have paragraph. We have title. So these are basically known as element nodes. So basically, XPath treats every XML or HTML document as a tree structure composed of these kind of nodes. Just like Google Maps treat your city as a network of interconnected streets, neighborhoods, landmarks, so on, right? So, so in the XPath, so we have these element nodes, right? Then we have attribute nodes. So when we talk about attribute nodes, what kind of a node it is? So if I say class is equals to header, now this class is an attribute having a value header. So that's why this is known as an attribute node. Similarly, if I say ID equals to main or something, so let's go back here and let me show you some class over here or any attribute. So let me inspect uh, this tutorials, and here, so you see that this href is basically an attribute. This class is attribute, and this class attribute has this value. So that's why this is known as an attribute node. And if you go to div or something like that, so this is known as element node. Now, in some cases, we have a node which are known as text nodes. So basically, the third thing is that you need to know is text nodes. Now, these text nodes are basically a tag contains the text. Basically, for example, if you see any paragraph tag, and inside that you see, for example, hello to XPath series. Now, this is written inside this p tag. So here, this is basically a text, and a node which contains the text is known as a text node. A node which contains the attribute is known as an attribute node. So if I go back here, and this is again, this is a text, right? So let's inspect this one. So you see that it's the H2 heading, right? And if I go here, so here it's inside the li, but again it's the text, right? So this is like this one, the paragraph one. So this is basically a text node. Okay, so there's a difference between element node and the text node. Then we have another type of nodes which is basically a root node, right? Now what is this root node? So a top level document node that contains everything. Okay, so again it's a tree like structure. So basically the top or the root node here is the one which is on the top. So here in this case, everything is inside this HTML tag. So here this HTML tag is the root node. Okay, so root node here is just like on the top one. So HTML tag in HTML document, the top node basically from where the document starts. Okay, top level document node. Okay, now there are other kind of node which are comments nodes. So basically we have comment nodes, and these are basically if you see some attribute or some element just like in the comment format. So like this way, if I say this is the way to comment something, so this is comment, and now this particular text is basically referring to a comment. So that's why that particular node is known as a comment nodes, right? And when we talk about these core concepts in terms of the nodes, because your HTML document is basically based on these kind of a nodes. So you will see the element nodes, you will see the attribute nodes, you will see the text nodes. So you need to traverse through. So for example, if you want to find some button, you want to find some text, you want to find some field, you need to traverse, you need to navigate. And how you navigate? Using the XPath, because XPath is basically a example path query language, which will help you to navigate through these nodes or the value of those nodes, right? In the XML or HTML documents. Hi everyone and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will learn about the XPath types which are absolute and relative. So let's begin. First, let's understand about the absolute XPath. So absolute XPath is a complete path from the root node. So usually in the HTML documents, we have a root node which is HTML tag to the target element. So what it means is that, let me go to the browser over here and here. So basically, if you go to this particular element over here and right click on this one, inspect on this one. So basically, when we talk about the absolute XPath, so it will start from this very first root node. So you need to go to the HTML, then go to the body, then inside body, you go to this div, then form, then div, then div, then div, then you will reach to this particular element in this case. So it follows a complete path. Okay. So in order to locate this element uniquely, you need to go step by step through the hierarchy. So it's a tree hierarchy. You need to find, okay, what is the element? Inside that element, you need to go through that element. Then inside that element, you need to identify that element. So in this way, you need to build a absolute XPath. Okay. Now, when we talk about absolute XPath, so let me give a real example in terms of the Google Maps. So, for example, you are staying at your home and you want to go to some specific hotel or maybe park or the pub. So, basically, you select directions from that, and now Google Map will tell you just go right, take left from the roundabout, take first exit, and it will guide you throughout the road. So you need to go through every intersection, every road, right? So this is basically a absolute XPath. Now, in terms of when we talk about the relative XPath, so relative XPath is different than this absolute one. So relative XPath does not start from this root HTML. Okay. Instead, it begins from the current node or any node in between. So basically, what I'm talking about is that in terms of the Google Map example, so you said that uh, I want to go to some nearby Starbucks, right? So it will take you to Starbucks, right? But because it's not saying that go right from your home, then left and take whatever the easiest or convenient route is available, it will take you to that particular Starbucks outlet, right? So in the similar way, relative XPath is basically does not start from the root. It might start directly from here, maybe from here, maybe from here, right? It's the nearest point from where you can locate the element, right? Now, if we talk about the XPath itself, so basically we go back here. So the absolute XPath, it starts with forward slash, like forward slash HTML, then body slash div. So in this way, this will make a complete path, right? Whereas in case of relative XPath, so basically it will go with the double forward slashes, and you can simply say input input, input, and then we are talking about, we are just saying that, okay, this is the input field based on the tag and it has attribute, for example, ID is equals to name. So we are referring to a node here. Instead of going from the very basic root node to the element, we are just going with the reference node over here, right? So this is the shorter and this is a very long in case we have a very long DOM structure. Okay. Now, in terms of the flexibility, basically, this absolute XPath is fragile in nature. Okay, so fragile means that it breaks if any part of the DOM changes. For example, let me create some bigger one. So slash div slash div slash div slash input. Now, developer changes the DOM structure and this particular div is no more. Then obviously it will break. So any kind of a changes in the DOM, it will break this one. That's why it's fragile in nature. Okay. So because we are following step by step tree structure. So that's why it's fragile in nature. Breaks any part of the DOM changes. Right. So fragile in nature breaks if any part of DOM changes. Whereas this is less fragile because we are, working on the specific node, right? We are referring to a specific node over here, right? So basically, that's why it's less fragile. Even it can be fragile as well, but it's less fragile in nature. It's less likely to affected by the DOM changes. Okay. Now, in terms of the speed, basically, so in terms of the speed, what do you think which should be the faster one? So obviously, the absolute one is slightly faster, right? Exact path, no searching. Because here you might be wondering why. Because here we exactly know that where we need to go. Here, right? So that's why it's slightly fast because it knows the exact path where it needs to go, right? So exact path slightly fast as it knows that exactly where it needs to go. So XPath doesn't need to search here, whereas this is slightly slower because it need to search our entire DOM, right? Because we are not telling the exact steps here. So what relative XPath is boost, I need to go and search through the entire DOM to find that particular element. So that's why it's slower because it needs to search entire DOM. So entire DOM means that we are actually referring to this complete HTML over here, right? That's why the relative XPath is slightly slower than the absolute one. Okay. Now we know that this absolute XPath is fragile in nature, right? So obviously, this is less recommended, and it is recommended in a cases where we know that we have a static pages and there are no frequent changes for that particular DOM, right? So let me write. So no DOM changes. So if this is a case, then you should go with the abstract path. But again, it's a less recommended one. Mainly, we have dynamic applications in nature. So that's why the preferred XPath is relative one. Though it's a bit slower, but still it's the preferred one. Right? Now, in terms of automation testing, it's really hard to maintain these XPaths. If this is long XPaths, it's really hard to maintain. So it needs to be small and to the point, like this relative one. So that's why when you're working with the automation testing, it's always recommended to use the relative XPath over the absolute. If there's no option left, then obviously you would be going with the absolute XPath. But most of the times you would be using the relative XPath over absolute XPath. Now let's go here and see it practically, right? So this is a form, and here what we need to do is that we need to identify this field. So first we will use the absolute path, and then we will use the relative path. You will see the difference between relative and absolute here. Okay, just like I said that we need to go from the root, which is HTML tag, right? So how gonna we write? We know that absolute XPath start with the single forward slash. So what we need to do is that we need to traverse through this till this particular field. Okay. So here you need to press Control F inside the DOM so that you can see this one. And here we can start writing the XPath. So forward slash HTML. Now, as soon as I go and traverse through this one, you will see the things getting highlighted in the form. So inside that, we need to go to the body. Now, body is highlighted. Then we need to go to this div. So this div is highlighted here, and on the right side, you see that the div is highlighted, right? And inside that, the form container is in the second one, not the first one. Okay. So again, forward slash div, and which div we need to go? We need to go to the second div. Now you see that this div is highlighted over here. So after that, where we need to go? We need to go to the form, right? And now this form is highlighted over here. And after the form, again, we have multiple divs. This one, this one, this one, this one, the same hierarchy. So we need to go to the first div, right? So simply div 1, see that this div highlighted, and again we need to go with the first div over here. You can see that. So forward slash div 1, right? And inside that we have this div, and inside this div we have an input, right? So div 1 slash div 1 slash div 1, and inside this one we have another div slash. Now we are traversing to now you see that this is basically a input field inside this particular div. So I will say input, right? So you see that we have traversed from the root element to this particular field over here, right? So this is basically an absolute XPath. Now tomorrow, if this developer removes this div or maybe this div, your XPath will break. So you won't be able to identify the element uniquely, right? Whereas we learned that about the relative XPath. So relative XPath start with the double. So what I'll do is that instead of this, I will directly say, okay, double forward slash, and I need input. Okay, so because this field is the input field, right? So this input, and I can go with this. However, you can see that it's already highlighted this one, but there is a problem. Problem is that it's finding all the input fields in this particular form, and it says there are 34. So we need to ensure that when we are writing the XPath, we should be creating it uniquely. So here we have this type equals to text, ID equals to first name, name equals to first name, placeholder is there. So these are basically ID, name, or these things are basically attributes. So utilizing these attributes, I can write the relative XPath. Okay. So input field, and here we need to use at the rate, then the attribute, for example here ID, okay, and here ID is basically the first name. So let me copy from here and paste it over here. Okay. So input double forward slash input at ID and this one and press enter. So again, here the problem is that still it says 00. The reason is that you need to close this thing. So the large bracket is missing from here. Now, as soon as I completed with the syntax, there's no syntax problem with the relative XPath. It says 1 of 1 and it identifies this field. So again, the purpose here is to identify the element uniquely. So what you can also do is that, for example, if this name is unique, so I will say name, okay, and again, you see that we have identified this element uniquely with the relative XPath. So it's better to use relative XPath over the absolute XPath. So in our upcoming tutorials, we will learn more concepts in terms of XPath like functions, text functions, contains, and there are so many things. So we will learn step by step in this particular series. Hello everyone and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will learn about the text-based XPath. So let's begin. When we are working with the XPath, one of the most common ways to look at the elements is by using the text inside the element. Now, this is extremely useful when the attributes like ID, class are dynamic in nature or they are missing. Okay, so basically the first way to locate the element is using the text function. So basically text function, and using this function we can create a XPath which will locate the element. Now this text function matches the elements based on their exact text content. So basically what it will do is that it will matches elements based on their exact text content. Okay, then the second way here is that using the contains with the text function. So basically we will be using contains with the text function. We already discussed about the text. We will see those practically shortly, but right now let's understand the concept. So we can use contains, and contains needs to be used with text function. Again, contains is a function over here. So basically we'll be using contains with the text. Okay, now the question is that when we should be using this contains, right? The question is always that when we should use this content. Okay, contains. So this is basically needs to be used when the text is a part of a longer string. So when text is part of longer string. So what it means is that, so basically you have a text like, let me write, this is example text. Okay, now this is a whole complete string. So this string contains this is example and text. So what I can do is that using contains, I will say that okay, the element should contain example. So now example is a part of this whole string. So when you have a long string, and for example this particular part, and this part is dynamic in nature, and this is constant. So in that kind of a scenarios, you can use the contains function. Okay, and finally we have a method or the function called normalize text. Normalize text or normalize space. So again, this needs to be used with text function. And here, let me give you example. For example, you have text like this way. space, text, then again a space, sample. Now you see that there's unnecessary spaces over here, this one and this one. So normalize space will basically normalize the extra spaces, line breaks, or the tabs. So it will remove any leading or trailing spaces and reduces the multiple spaces to a single line. Okay, and also what you can do is that you can go with the multiple text conditions. Okay, so multiple text conditions, multiple text conditions. And when you talk about multiple conditions, so you will be combining with or and and. So basically using the logical operators, we will be combining the multiple conditions. We will say, okay, find the element. If it's find the element, let's take example. Find an element where text is equals to test, or text is equals to example. So again, you can utilize the multiple conditions and identify that particular element. Okay, and when we are using these again, so basically, you know, the point here is that we need to identify the elements uniquely, right? So this is the purpose. Okay, so that's why we are learning all these concepts. Okay, let's go to the browser over here, and here let's see some things practically now. Now, for example, you see that this first name, right? So if I inspect this one, and you see that this is a text, right? So this is a label tag, and inside that we have this particular text. So now, for example, there is no other thing available, right? No ID available, no name is available, no class is available, right? So how I can identify this element? So basically, uh, just like we can use the text function, we can use the contains and so on. So in order to write the XPath for this one, again, this is a directive XPath with double forward slash. Okay, name of the tag. So tag is label over here, right? And inside that, we need to use this text function, and we'll say text is equals to, okay, and we need to provide the exact text. Okay, so exact text is this one. Copy this one and provide this one here with the static and close the bracket. Now you see that it uniquely identified this label using the text function. And for example, if you want to locate this personal information from here, so now here this personal information, if I right click and inspect on this one, so this is H2 heading, right? So it's not label, it's H2. So H2 again text, so copy this text and paste this text over here. You see that it uniquely identified this particular element. Now again, this is a relative XPath, and here we are using a text function which is used to find the element using the exact text. Okay, now we have this email address over here, right? And we can use the contains. So for example, this address part is dynamic in nature and it keeps changing, but still you can locate this element by the text which contains this part only, right? So what I'll do is that simply this is, let me locate this complete one, and here again this is a label. Okay, so we need to provide here label, and now we need to use contains with the text. So let me remove this complete part from here, and we need to say okay contains. Now what it should contains, basically we'll be using a text function with this one, Okay, and it should contain, now we need to provide comma, and we need to provide a part of that particular string. Okay, and now close this small bracket and close this large bracket. So you see that it identified this email address just with the email part of the text, and we can easily locate this element using the contain and text. Okay, now we can take example of the normalized space again. Normalized space needs to be used in the very same way, and here we go and inspect this one. So again, this is a label, and instead of this contains part, basically now we need to use the normalize space. So normalize, NORM, normalize dash space. Okay, now inside that we need to provide, okay, which kind of a text it needs to normalize. So normalize space, small bracket. Okay, then again text, right? And now we need to close with a small bracket and equals to, now we say the phone number. Okay, phone number, and at the end we need to close with the large bracket. So you see that we have identified this phone number using this normalized space. Assume that there is some trailing spaces or leading spaces, but it will lose that, it will normalize those spaces. So normalized spaces will basically normalize spaces, and where it will be normalizing spaces, basically inside the text. So that's how you can use the normalize with the text, contain with the text, and finally we need to see a practically for the multiple conditions as well. Okay, now you want to identify this particular radio option, and if I go here, inspect this one. So this is the type of radio. Though I can, write XPath directly for this one, but for this example, what I'll do is that I will use a multiple condition over here. So assume that you don't have a ID name, these things. So you can utilize the conditions. Okay. So this is basically an input. So let's write this one again. Double forward slash. This is input, right? And at the attribute is type. Okay, and we need basically it's a radio, right? So basically we say radio. Now using unlogical conditions, either we will be using or maybe we can use the and. So here I'm using the and. Again, it depends on the element, right? And I will say following dash sibling, following sibling, double colon again. Now I am referring it with the parent or siblings. So siblings means that if I hover this one again, so you will see that, let me show you. If I go here, so you see that uh, this is the ready option, and sibling means that which is on the same level. So these both are siblings, right? And here this one is basically of this particular label for male, the male, this one is basically a following sibling, is following this one, right? So that's why it's a following sibling. So using this following sibling, I'll say go and find the radio option where the following sibling is basically having a text equals to male, because this is text male, right? So following sibling, and again it's a label, and we were using our text function, text equals to male, and we need to close the brackets. So you see that we have successfully located this element using condition and the text functions, right? So let again, this might be looks complicated. Let me explain you again. So what I did is that I tried to find or locate this element. So I was writing an XPath, and here what I did is that I say, okay, locate a radio option. So there are four. So I would say, okay, locate a radio option where the sibling is having a text male, because other siblings have different female, other, or prefer not to say. These are the siblings for the other radio options. So if you have this kind of a scenario, you can locate the element in this way. So let me summarize the today's session. So basically, we learn about the text-based XPath, where we learn about using the text function. So basically, we learn about the text function, and it matches the elements based on their exact text content. Then we learn about the contains, and contains needs to be used with the text function. So where we need to know that, okay, the part of the string is always constant and the rest can be dynamic in nature. So we can take the constant part and we can utilize, okay, this particular string has this part. So on based on this, we can use the contains with the text and identify that element uniquely. And then we learn about normalize space. So it will basically normalize the space, and we are saying that, okay, normalize the space when we are talking about the text. So normalize space means that we are saying that remove the spaces, training spaces, these kind of stuff. And then at the end, we learn about the multiple conditions. So we said that, okay, when we have no ID, no class, nothing is available. So but we know that in the sibling we have a label, and where we saw that it contains a text as a male. So using that one, we actually come up with the XPath, right? So again, let me repeat the last one. So we identify this radio option using its sibling. Sibling means which is on the same level. So these both are sibling. Now this label for the male is basically following this one, right? After this one. So that's why it's a following sibling. And following sibling is basically label, and the text for this one is male. So using this reference, basically sibling reference, we identified this radio options, right? So in our upcoming tutorials, we will learn more concepts so that you can master, the XPath. So because there are so many scenarios where you need to write the custom XPath for your automation. Okay. Hello everyone, and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will learn position-based XPath. So let's begin. When you are working with the complex DOM structures, you often need to locate the elements based on their position among the siblings. Now what siblings means here is that if you look this DOM structure, so basically this div, this div, this div, and this div. So basically these are siblings to each other because they are on the same level. And this div is basically a parent for these siblings. Now, XPath provides multiple ways to do this using the position function, last function, and specific position number. So what it means, so let me go to the notepad over here. So the first thing you need to know about the position function. So position function. Now, what this position function will do, basically it is used when you want to identify the element based on its exact position within the parent element. Okay, so within the parent element. So if I go back here, so this is parent, right? These are the siblings. So basically you can use the position function because you want to identify the elements, identify these elements based on their exact position. Now this is first position, this is second, this is third, and this is fourth position. So based on the exact position number, you can identify these elements within its parent element. So this is the parent and this is siblings. Okay. So that's how you can work with the position function. We'll see that practically right now. Just understand these concepts first and then we'll see the practically. Okay. The second thing is that is basically a last function. So we go here and here we have a last function. Now, last function is used to locate the last element in the set of elements. So you have, for example, 10 elements. So it will, and you want to identify the last element from that. So you can easily identify. So again, we will go back here. So these are 4 elements and you want to identify this fourth one. So you can use the last function over here. Okay. So in using the last one, you can easily identify. Again, the purpose of learning this concept is that we need to identify the element uniquely, right? Because if it is not uniquely identified, then your automation script will fail. Okay. And the last thing is that we for today's session is regarding the specific position numbers. Okay. So specific position numbers. Now, here what you can do is that you can directly use numbers in square brackets without the position function. Okay, so basically, here again we are doing the same thing, but here we are using the position function, and here we are directly using the numbers in the brackets in order to identify that element. So that's the difference between. So in interviews, the interviewer might ask you that you want to identify the element with the position, but you don't want to need you don't need to use basically a function. So how you can identify that using the XPath? So basically, you can directly use the numbers in the square brackets without using the position function. Now, let's go here and see these practically right now. So first, let's with using the position function, and let's start with double forward slash. Again, this is a relative, XPath. So div, and here you see that we have a class called form underscore row. So let's go with this class. Add class is equals to form dash row. And here, now you see that we have identified this particular row from using this particular XPath. But so far we haven't used the position. Okay. And if you go here, inside this, we have this first div. This is second div, right? So this is a parent and these are the child and these both are basically sibling to each other. Okay. So now if we want to go based on the position of this one, so what I'll do is that here inside this again we have double forward slash div and now position. Okay. And after position is equals to 1 and close the large bracket. You see that we have successfully identified this element based on the position and we use the position function over here. Okay. If I change it to 2, you see that inside this we are locating this element, okay, using the position, and here you see that this is a position 1 and this is a position 2, and that's how you can use the position function to locate the element. Now what I'll do is that here let's change this position part from here and I say last, right? So what happens is that it will go with the last option. right? So instead of doing this, let me give you more examples around this one. So let's go with some other options over here. So we have these check boxes, right? So // okay. So inspect this one, this area. So you see that this is basically by this one. So you see that this is a main checkbox div, which is a parent, and then we have this sub, right? These are siblings to each other and their child for this one. Okay. So div add class equals to checkbox dash group, right? So it identified the whole group of checkboxes, right? But what we need a last on this one. So slash div, and here we say last and provide this one. So you see that from this particular, we have easily allocated the last, the element, right? And if I go here, we have more more options over here. So you can practice with any of these, right? But the concept here is that you can use this last function to identify the last among the list, right? So now what we can do is that we can now learn how to use the specific position numbers, right? Where we don't need to use these functions. So how we can do this? So if I scroll up basically. So we have these radio options, right? And we have these radio options. So what I'll do is that simply you can say div, then bracket at the rate class is equals to. Now let me inspect this one. So this is radio dash group. So the class is radio dash group, and just close this one and slash. Now, for example, we need to go with the second or third, for example. So we see that, you see that we have divs inside. Okay. So I will say div, and if I say first div, so you see that the first div is highlighted, which is male. And if you want to go with the second, right, just provide the second. If you want with the third, go with the third. If you want to go with the fourth, you can provide the fourth. So in this way, basically, you can, locate the element using the positions. So in today's session, what we learned is that we learned three things. So you can create XPath using the position. So this is basically a position-based XPath where we learned about position function, we learned about the last function, and we learned that using the basic position numbers, we can locate those elements. So if I go to my notepad again here, so here, so position-based function is used when you want to identify the element based on its exact position within the parent element. Last function is used to locate the last element in the set of elements, just like we saw in the example. Then specific position numbers means that you can directly use the numbers in the square brackets without the position function. So that's what we did here in the last example, right? We haven't used the position function. So if you're going to the interview, so interviewer might ask, without using a position function, write a XPath, and you should be using a position. The examiner or the interviewer might ask you to find the thread element, right? So that's how you can identify the elements using the position based. Hello everyone and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will learn about the XPath axis. So let's begin. So what are XPath axes? So basically XPath axes define the direction in which we navigate through the DOM relative to the current node. Okay, so they will help you to move up, down and sideways in the elements hierarchy. So if I go to the browser over here and you see that this is our DOM. So basically, the axes are helpful in navigating through the DOM. This is the DOM and related to the current node. For example, this is a current node. Now you can go up, down, sideways, right? So now the question is that why we need to navigate through the DOM in upward or downward, right? So basically, some elements don't have the unique attributes. Like you don't have the ID or name, then how you will locate that element? Similarly, accesses allows you to locate such elements based on their relationship with the other elements. Okay, just like parent, siblings, right, child. Okay, so they make your XPath expression dynamic and flexible. So let's go to the notepad over here. Write the definition for this one. So basically, they are XPath accesses define the direction in which we navigate through DOM relative to the current node. Now, why they are important? Maybe in some cases, some elements don't have unique attributes like ID or name. Okay, so in this case, you need to develop a relationship, right? So let me correct the spelling over here. Don't and unique. Now, so they basically allow you to locate such elements where you don't have the unique ID or name. Okay, so they help to locate such elements based on their relationship with other elements. Okay, so there are multiple accesses. For example, just like in our real life, we have relationship like we have siblings, we have parents, we have child. So in similar way, the elements in the DOM has some parent elements, some sibling elements, some child element. So based on the relationship, we will try to locate those elements. Okay, and the first is basically the parent access. Now what this X is basically, so how you can use this one? So basically you need to write parent double colon. Now this axis is used to move upwards. Remember that it is used to move upwards in the DOM tree from the current node. Okay, so is used to move upwards. Okay, in the DOM tree from the current node and selects its immediate parent element. So you have a node, from that you need to go upward, okay, and from that node you need to identify the parent element. Got it? Let me go to the browser over here. So this is the child diffs for this particular diff. Now this diff is a parent for these two ones. Now using this one, we can go upward and locate this parent diff. So that's why it is known as a parent access. Now the question here is that when to use this parent access. So when you know a child element, for example, you know about this child element, but you want to locate its container or the parent one, and unfortunately assume that the parent doesn't have a unique attribute. So you can, based on the relationship, you can locate the parent element, right? So this is the purpose of the parent access. Okay, and then we have a child access. child access, and child access you need to use in this way, child double colon, and this access selects all the different child elements of a given parent. For example, there's a parent, okay, and it selects all the direct child of that element. So basically, this access selects all direct child elements of the given parent node. Now again, the question here is that when to use the child access. So basically, when you want to locate a direct children of a parent node, again, the point here is that you are unable to identify the child one based on the attributes. Either the attributes are not available or dynamic in nature or due to any reason. Then, in that case, you want to use that child access. So basically, useful in a structured layouts where multiple levels of elements exist. Okay. Then we have like following sibling access. Following sibling access. Now, what this access is all about? Now, this following sibling, in order to use this one, you will be using following dash sibling and again double colon. Now, this access selects the elements that are at the same level in the DOM and come after the current node. So basically, if I go to the browser over here, okay, now these two are basically siblings to each other because they are on the same level in the DOM. Okay, so you can refer to the sibling, and from sibling you can identify the element. Okay, so if I go here, so basically select elements that are at the same level in the DOM and come after the current node. Okay, so this is the purpose of using the following sibling access. Okay, then because we are talking about the relationships, that we are identifying the elements based on their relationship, right? So we have a preceding sibling as well. Now we talked about following sibling, then we have preceding sibling. Okay, and how to use this, you need to use double colon again, and this access basically selects elements that are at the same level in the DOM and come before the current node. Okay, so following means after that node, preceding means come before that node. Okay, again, the these can be used when you are unable to identify the main element. So these concepts will help you to locate the element uniquely. That's why we are learning these concepts over here, right? So now let's go here and see this practically. And using the parent access, what we'll do is that let's learn to use the parent access. Okay, so Control F double forward slash, for example, so I'll explain you this one. So input now at the rate of then ID. So I'll say, for example, ID is equals to, let's go with this one. Okay, so I'll say ID is first name. So let's copy this one from here. Okay, and close this bracket. Now we have successfully identified this first name input field. But what if you want to identify the diff? Okay, the parent diff for this one, right? So basically, you will be using slash parent double colon and diff. So for this input, the parent diff is this one. So in your case, if you want to locate this diff and this diff doesn't contain unique attributes like name, ID, class or something, then using this. So you see that from here we go top. From here we go to the top using this parent access, right? So parent diff of the first name we identified using this particular int field. Okay. Now let's see the example of the child access. Okay. In the same way, what we'll do is that we'll go with, let's suppose we'll go with div, then say at the rate id equals to, then we have, let's see which element we can identify here. Okay, so personal information. Okay, so personal info. So if you go here and look at this one, so this is the div with the id, this one. So let's copy this one. Okay, and now I need a child. Okay, so but we need to close this one info here. Okay, so you see that the whole div is selected. Okay, now this whole div, so using a child I can navigate to the child elements, right? So I'll say child colon, and let's suppose we need to go to this h2. Okay, so simply type here h2. Okay, so we press enter. So here div, and here we have provided the id of this one, and then here we need to provide the forward slash. So you see that we have successfully identified this element with the relationship. Here the relationship is the child relationship. Okay, now let's see the examples for the siblings, like following sibling and preceding siblings. Okay, let's remove this one from here and let's go with, let's say, label, and at the rate, and at the rate for equals to, let's go with the first name and close this one, press enter. You see that nothing happened over here. Okay, then we need to go with the following dash sibling colon input. Okay, so that's how you can actually develop a relationship between the parent and siblings. Okay, here it's unable to identify this one, and let's see why this happened. So basically, when we were writing this one, we have given double quotes over here. It should be a single quote, right? So what we did is that if you go here, so basically this label and this input field both are on the same level. They are sibling. And now here we are talking about the following sibling. So using this label, okay, for this label, this input is a following sibling, right? So using this one, we identified this element. Okay. In a similar way, what we can do is that we can go with the preceding element. For example, using this one, we can identify this label. Okay. So remove this lines of code from here, and let's see input at the rate id is equals to, for example, let's go with the last name. Okay, so the id is basically a last name. Copy this one and paste it over here, and once we have identified the last name, close the bracket. You see that we have successfully identified the last name input field. And using this one, okay, preceding means the one before this one, right? So this one. So now we will say forward slash, okay, and we will say preceding dash sibling colon, and for example we need to look at this label one, okay, so we'll type label. So you see that we have successfully locate this label using a relationship, and this is a preceding, both are on the same level, right? And using this one, this particular label comes before this element, so that's why it's a preceding. So using this one, we identify this one, so this is preceding. And following means that if we need to locate input, but we need to locate the input using this label, so here in that case it would be a following sibling. So in today's tutorial, what we learned about the axis. So axis again is basically used to move upwards in the DOM, upwards and downwards in the DOM to identify the elements. So there are multiple ones, right? So basically you have parent, child, following, sibling, we have preceding sibling. And why we need to use these accesses is because some of them don't have the unique attributes like ID or name. So based on their relationship with the other elements, we can locate those elements. Okay. And in the parent is used to move upwards in the DOM. Child selects all the direct child elements of the given parent node. Siblings means which are on the same level in the DOM. But when we talk about the following sibling, so following sibling means that which will come after the current node. Come after the current node. And in preceding, it will basically come before the current node. Okay. So when you want to locate the element which comes before that sibling or before that current node, in that case, you will be using the preceding sibling concept. Hello everyone and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will learn about the logical operators in XPath. So let's begin. Logical operators allows you to combine the multiple conditions in your XPath expressions. Now this makes your element selection more precise or more flexible depending on your needs. As automation tester, our goal is to identify that element uniquely. Now, these logical operators are very much helpful when you are working with the dynamic web pages where attributes and elements change really frequently, right? So let me write a definition over here. So basically, logical operators allow you to combine multiple conditions in your XPath expressions. Okay, and there are three logical operators. The first one is AND operator, then we have OR operator, then we have NOT operator. Now let's talk about this AND operator. So basically it combines multiple conditions and all conditions must be true. So for example, you have condition 1, then you have condition 2, then you have condition 3. So in case of AND operator, so basically all must return true, all must be true. So this condition should be true, this condition should be true, this condition should be true. So basically when you are selecting an element that has more than one specific attribute, when you are target element shares a tag name with others, but you want to narrow it down using the multiple filters. Okay, in that case, all conditions must return true. This means that all conditions should be fulfilled. If any of the condition return false, it will not work. Okay. In case of or or operator, so you have like condition. Let me copy this one from here and here. So basically, what happens in the case of or, at least one condition must be true. At least one condition must be true. So if condition 1 is true and condition 2 is false, it will work. If condition 1 is false, condition 2 is true, even in that case it will work. But in where we in a scenario where both condition 1 and condition 2 both will be false, then this will not work, right? So or means any of the condition should be true. Okay. And when we talk about the not, so not means negate. Okay. Not operator, basically we're talking about negate. So basically, for example, if I say that select an element which does not meet my requirement or does not meet my specific condition. Okay. Select element which does not meet the condition. So for example, I'm saying that I need a software tester which does not belongs to maybe XYZ company or XYZ city, or maybe I need a software tester which does not have uh, performance testing skills. Just giving you a hypothetical example over here just to make you understand. Okay, now let's see these three practically. Let's go to the browser over here, and we have this form which we are using for the learning purposes. And here what we will is that let's write a condition. Again, we are learning this concept so that at the end of the day you should be able to write an XPath expression which can uniquely identify the element, right? So here we have different input fields, and here let's control F, and we are writing the relative XPath which start with a double forward slash, and let's suppose we need to find the input field. So I'll say input field, and there right now you see that as soon as I type the tag, it says that 1 of 34. Now we need to narrow down, we need to filter, right? So we can go with the conditions here, and I say at the rate where type. So you see that in the input field we have an attribute like type is equal to text. Okay, and for this first name we have type is equal to text. We have for this particular last name, again we have input field with the type is equal to text, right? So let's first go with the type. Okay, so I will say type is equals to text. Now we have just narrowed down, and now we are come to 1 of 8, but I need to identify this first name field. So what I'll do is that I will use a condition over here, and at the rate, and here we don't need to close this one, and at the rate, for example, I will say where id is equals to, and id is basically his first name. Let's copy this from here and paste it over here and close the bracket. Now you see that we have just used the condition. Now if you look in this particular element, this first condition is true and second condition is also true. That's why we are able to locate this element. We have type equals to text, and the id here is equals to first name. That's why we are able to locate this element using AND operator. Okay, and let's see another other example. Let's see, we need to find some button. I'll say button and at the rate type, and type again is for example, I need to find some button over here. Let's scroll down, and let's suppose we need to find this button. Okay, so type, if I inspect this one, let me inspect this one. Okay, so type here is submit. Okay, so I'll say type equals to submit, and if I close this one, though we are able to identify it uniquely, but in case if you're not able to identify it uniquely, you might need to filter it further. So let's filter this further, and I say and add class is equals to, and this is the class. So let me copy this one, and this is my second condition. Close the bracket, and you see that we have successfully identified this element uniquely. Though I know that we can simply, in this particular example, we can identify it using this submit type only. But just to demonstrate you that how we can use this AND operator. Okay. Now here in AND, both conditions needs to be true, and in case of OR, any condition needs to be true. For example, input, and let's suppose at the rate type is equals to, I'll say type equals to email, and if I close this one, we can identify this field. Okay, and I will say or at type is equals to, for example, I'll say 12. Okay, so again you see that we are able to identify the element here. If any of the condition is true, it will return the element. Now problem here is that though we learn that we are using the OR, so in our case right now what is happening, the first condition is also true and second condition is also true. That's why we are seeing two elements, right? Type 12 is for this number, and this one is for the email. For example, if I change here 1 2 3, now this becomes 1 of 1. Now the first condition is true and second is false over here. So you need to understand this concept where you can use or and. And let's suppose you want a scenario where you want a condition in a negate form. Even you can negate the condition. Again, depending on your DOM you're working, the scenarios you're working. Now let's see the example for the not here. So we are negating this one. So let's suppose we say at type equals to text and not and not negating this one, not at the rate id. So I'm saying that the id should not be equals to the first name. Okay, so I want an input field having the text, but the id should not be first name. Okay, so id should not be a first name. id should not be first name at the rate. So here we need a small brackets before closing this one because we need to negate this one, right? So here again, basically we are negating that the second part should not be the first name. Okay, so input field type equals to text and not at id first name. So you can negate. So also you can go with, like, for example, I will say double forward slash div at the rate class equals to, for example, I will say section and not, again, small bracket at the rate the attribute. So I'll say id equals to, for example, we have, if we go up over here, so we have this person information, right? So if I inspect this person information, so this is the id for this particular div. So let me copy this one and paste this one here, and we need to close this one and then the last bracket. Again, the purpose here is to negate that condition, right? So we are looking for a div which has having a class section, and if there are multiple, then it should not give me a, a element which has a id of person info. So again, the concepts here is that we need to uniquely identify the element. Though we are still unable to locate this one, we will try to filter and learn more concept to make it unique. But right now, just understand the concept is that you can use the logical operators to write your XPath expression. There are three logical operators. We have and, or, and not. And basically, in case of AND operator, your all conditions must be true. All conditions must return true. In case of OR, at least any one condition must return true. And not operator means that select an image which does not meet the condition. So if we are using some condition and using not, so we are saying that this condition should not meet, right? So that's how you can basically use the logical operators and make your XPath unique. Hello everyone and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will learn about the XPath string functions. So let's begin. XPath provides a powerful string functions to help testers precisely locate the elements based on the text and the attribute values. In this tutorial, we will explore three commonly used string functions in XPath that are essential in automation testing, especially you are working with the Selenium or the Playwright. So the first one we want to learn is basically starts with the function. Okay, so the first one is basically starts dash with. Now what this start dash with will do basically? So basically this function checks if an attribute or text value begins with a specific string. So what we need to do is that we need to locate the element based on the string it starts with. Let's take example over here. We want to look at the element and that element has a string. This is a string example. Now this particular string starts with this, right? So what we can do is that we can locate this element using the starts with function, because it checks if an attribute or text value begins with the specific string, right? Then secondly, we will learn about another function which is substring. Okay, so we'll learn about substring. So what this substring function will do basically, again, substring means a part of that particular string. So basically what it will do is that it will extract a portion of a string based on the static position and length. Okay, based on the, let me correct this, based on the starting, position, and length. So basically, if I summarize this one, so basically extracting a text from a bigger text, basically. So this is a complete string, and if you want to extract this part, so this is known as a substring over here, right? We'll see this practically shortly, but right now understand this concept. And third one, we just talk about a lamp. So basically, we have another function called string length. So string dash length. Now this function calculates the number of characters in a string. Okay, so basically length means how many characters we have in this particular string. So for example, for this particular string, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then the spaces are also count 8, 9, 10, 11, so on. Assume that this contains 20. So basically, a length of the string in terms of characters and spaces. Okay. Now let's see this practically, and let's go to the browser over here. And here in the browser, let's click on inspect and then click Control F so that we can have this particular area where we can write the XPath. So double forward slash. Now let's go with the input. Now I will say that input starts dash with, and here I will say okay at the rate ID comma, and here I will say, let's suppose we have a first name, right? So we will say first. Okay. So how we identify this particular element here? We are saying that we need to look for a input field where ID starts with the first. So here start, because the complete ID is first name, but with the starts with what? So basically, we are saying that it should start with the first. First, we are talking about this first, right? In similar way, what we can say is that starts with, I'll say, if I go here and spread this wheel, and here is last, right? So if I say starts with the last, so you see that we have successfully able to locate this particular field by writing the XPath expression using a string function. So we are saying that the string will start with this. Again, as automation tester, the purpose here is that we need to locate the element uniquely. We need to write a XPath expression in such a way that it should uniquely identify the element. Okay. Now we just learned that how starts with work. So now let's see about the substring over here, and let's suppose say substring at the rate ID, and I'll say let's again go with this first name field. So I'll say ID comma 1 comma 4. Okay, and we are basically providing the starting and ending point. We are extracting the string, right? So we are extracting. So we are saying that we need the ID where 1 comma 4 first character till the fourth character basically is let's suppose we say first, right? So 1 comma 4 then is equals to, I will say, first. Okay, and let's close this one. Now you see that we have successfully identified the same field. Here we are saying that we need to find a input field where the substring, and where we are finding the substring, we are saying that we are finding a substring in the ID, and we are saying that the substring will be from 1 character to 4 characters. Okay, and we given those values, and based on that, it successfully identified this particular field. Okay, now in some cases, what happens is that you might need to find, element where string length should be greater than 5. There might be some long string, so based on that, or maybe some small string, so you can go with this approach here as well. So for example, I will say input string dash length, and length of, now I'm saying that based on the attribute. Okay, so I will say the ID. So length of the ID basically, length of the ID basically should be greater than, for example, I say 5, and close this one. Now it will bring all the input fields where ID value is greater than 5. That's why we are getting 24 results. But again, remember here is that our purpose here to uniquely identify. We learned different concepts throughout this series. So it's not necessary that this particular concept will work every time. Sometimes you might need to go with the parent-child relationship. Sometimes you might need to go with the logical operators. Sometimes you need to go with the string functions. Again, so we are learning all these concepts so that at the end of the day, you should be able to locate the element uniquely by writing the XPath expression. Okay. So for this particular tutorial, let me summarize this one. So we talked about the XPath string functions. We talk about 3 common functions which we usually use. So one is starts with. So it will check if the attribute or text value begins with a specific string. Then we learn about substring. So we are extracting a portion of a string based on its starting position and the length. We are saying that okay, starting position is 1 and the length should be 4, right? Then the final one is basically we learn about the string length. So we are basically saying that okay, that string length should be greater than or less than or equal to maybe 5, 8 or 10. In some cases, this might also work because there might be a very long string which contains 500 characters, and that's the only one string. So you can say that where characters are greater than 499. So obviously, it will pick only that particular element. Okay. So that's how you can work with the XPath strings. Hi everyone, and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will learn to write the XPath with the multiple attributes. So let's begin. So far in this series, mainly we were using a single attribute to write XPath. However, if the single attribute is not sufficient, we can go with the multiple attributes. So in this particular tutorial, we will learn how you can utilize the multiple attributes. Okay. So for example, if we want to locate this field, and if I select this one, so basically you see that it has a multiple attributes available right now. We have a type, we have ID, name, placeholder. So what I'll do is that I need to identify this element uniquely. Okay. So I will be using multiple attributes, and this is input field. So // input, and you see that as soon as I typed // input, so all the input fields are available over here, and there are 34 right now, you see here, but our goal is to make it unique. Okay, so for this particular field we have type is equals to text. Okay, so at the rate type is equals to text. Okay, and close this large bracket. Though for this particular field we have successfully identified this one, but still it says one of the 8 fields and it doesn't serve the purpose as automation tester. So we want to make it unique. So we can add more attributes. So we have here ID, we have a name, right? So let's go with the other attributes. So in order to use the multiple attributes, again start with the large bracket, then again attribute at the rate, attribute for example name is equals to, I'll say name is this one, the first name. So let's copy this one from here and paste it over here and close this one. Now in this particular XPath, we have successfully identified this element uniquely by using the 2 attributes, right? The first attribute was a text and the second attribute was name. And text is basically referring to a type attribute over here, right? We can go with as many attributes as we can. It's not limited to the 2, right? So for example, if you are unable to locate this field uniquely even by using the 2 attribute, you can go with the third. So let's go with the ID. So I'll say at the rate ID is equals to, and let's copy this ID from here and paste it over here and close the large bracket. Now you see that we have used 3 attributes. The first one is type, which has a value text. Then we used name attribute having the value first name, and then ID, and our ID is also having a first name value, right? Now let's see another example. For example, we need to identify this email address. Let's inspect this one. Remove this one from here. And again, this is input type. So I will say / input large bracket at the rate type is equals to, and the type is basically email. And if I close this one here, though we have uniquely identified this one, but again, as automation tester, if one attribute is not sufficient, we can go with the other attribute. So this time we see that we have a placeholder as well, right? And we can go with the placeholder, we can go with the name, go with the ID, right? So I will say at the rate name is equals to, and name is basically email, and close this one. So you see that we have successfully located this element. We have written an XPath where we have used multiple attributes, and here if you observe that we haven't used any logical operator, we haven't used or and add. Okay, now let's go for any other one over here. So let's scroll down, and here we have this submit button. So inspect this one, and this is button, so / button, then at the rate, so we have type equals to button, type is equals to button, close large bracket. Here you see that it says one of the 4, and again as automation tester, it's not serving my purpose. I need to write a XPath which should uniquely identify the element, so I can go with the multiple attributes over here. So we have ID, or we can go with the class. So we have a class, so I'll say at the rate class is equals to this one. So let's copy this one, paste this one, and close this one. Now still it says one of 2 elements. This means that though I have used 2 attributes, still this XPath is not uniquely identifying the element. So if I see any other attribute right now here, so if I go here and let me scroll down, hit this one. So this submit button. So I will say, okay, let's go with this one. So the type is basically submit, and class is basically the primary one. Copy this one and paste it over here. And we can have this, ID as well. So I'll say large bracket at the rate ID is equals to submit button, and provide this value over here and close the large bracket. Now here, now to identify the submit button, so we have used three attributes. The first attribute is type, having a value submit. Then we use a second attribute, which is class, having a value button dash primary. And then we use the third attribute, which is ID, having this submit button value. So if I summarize today's tutorial, so basically what we have done so far is basically utilize the multiple attributes without using the logical operators over here. Instead of using or and, simply what I did is that I use multiple attributes while writing the XPath. And again, if we are using double forward slash, this means that we are talking about the relative XPath. Okay, so in this way, giving a first attribute, then second attribute, third, fourth, and there's no limit to it. So at the end of the day, again, our purpose here is to identify that element uniquely. Though these elements can be located using the other concepts which we have learned, where we have parent, child, we learn about logical operators. You can use any of those concepts. There's no hard and fast rule. Our goal is to locate the element uniquely. And for today's session, our purpose was to learn that we can utilize the multiple attributes without using the logical operators, and we can uniquely identify the element by writing the XPath, where we can utilize the multiple attributes. Hello everyone, and welcome to this XPath series for the testers. In this particular tutorial, we will utilize the AI to generate the XPath. So let's begin. So far in this series, we have learned the different XPath concepts so that you can write your own XPath. However, we are living in an era where we have the AI as well. So what we do in this particular tutorial is that we will leverage the AI and we will generate the XPath using the AI. So we are mostly using the ChatGPT on a daily basis. Now utilize the ChatGPT to write the XPath. So let's go here, and for example, we need XPath for this particular field. Right click on this field, inspect this field. Now this is the HTML for this one, right? So right click on this one, go to the copy and copy outer HTML. Okay, and now go to the ChatGPT over here and paste it over here. Okay, and after pasting this one, ask ChatGPT to write a XPath. So usually the preference is to the relative XPath. So I will ask the ChatGPT to write or generate the XPath with respect to the relativeness. Okay. So I'll say write relative XPath for the element shared. Here no XPath has been generated, and here ChatGPT is searching the multiple XPath over here, and we look here. So relatively, the reliable XPath is using by the ID, so it's provided with the ID, provided with the name, with the placeholder, and using the multiple attributes. So these are all concepts which we have already learned, right? And here use the contains. Now problem here is that the ChatGPT doesn't know the all about the DOM. So based on the simple estimate of that particular element, it generated all the possible XPaths, right? So if I copy this one and if I go here and just search this one. So in this case, it is working, but it is not always possible that it should work because the chat GPT doesn't have a context of this whole DOM, right? Now, then what is the solution? So if this is not working, then how we can leverage the AI? So basically, in Chrome, we have a AI assistant, okay? And using that AI assistant, we can write the XPath based on the current DOM. So let me show you this one. Let's go to the Chrome browser, and here again, right click on this one, click on inspect, and here what you can do is that simply you need to go to this settings option, and here go to the AI innovations, click on this one, scroll down. We have this AI assistance, so by default is off, just turn it on, and once you turn it on, you will see AI assistance over here at the bottom. Now this AI assistance is working inside the browser, so it can analyze the complete DOM. Okay, so here I will say analyze the complete DOM and write relative XPath for the element for this element, and here we need to provide that element. So basically again, let me copy here out of HTML and provide this one. Now you will see that it will analyze the complete DOM because this AI assistant is working inside the browser dev tools. Okay, so press enter. So it's analyzing the prompt, and so it come up with the XPath. But this XPath will most likely be a unique in nature because this particular AI assistant have access to your DOM. So the XPath here they actually provided again the multiple XPath. So here are two relative XPath expressions for the second element. This is the one, and this is the one. Okay, and here you see that it doesn't give us the more options, right? Because it has access to the DOM. So if I copy this one and here Control F, provide this one, remove this part, and you see that we have successfully identified one of one, right? And also what you can do is that you can provide the complete HTML for this one. So for that, if I close this one and we have a view page source, copy this complete one, and now again go back to ChatGPT, right? And let's say I am providing complete HTML, analyze this HTML and provide unique relative XPath for the above element, right? Because we have already shared the element, so ideally this ChatGPT model should be able to make a context with this previous chat. Okay, so press enter and sure. So sorry, we haven't provided the HTML over here, so please paste the full HTML, and here again select all, copy, and here paste the full HTML. But here problem is that we have a chat limit. If you have a smaller option, you can go with this one, but it assumed now because it needs to provide you some option for this one, so it assumed, right? So obviously when you are working with the LM models, they have a limit for the text you provide as a prompt. If you have a smaller HTML, then obviously it will be able to analyze that HTML and provide the result. But if you have a huge HTML like the one I provided, so it says that it cannot process the whole HTML because of the length of the prompt, right? But again, this is a way as well where you can utilize providing the complete HTML, because when you provide the complete HTML, it has access to all the HTML elements. Then it can analyze, and based on the analysis it can come up with the unique expert. But again, my recommendation here is that utilize this AI assistance which we just saw here, and using this AI assistant, so simply if I click on this one, okay, to use this AI assistant, it will have a more accurate expert. In case if these AI fail to provide the unique XPath, either using this AI assistant or by providing a context or HTML to the ChatGPT or any other model, then obviously we have learned these concepts so that we can write our own XPath. But to make you productive, so that you can develop or run the scripts as quickly as possible, so you should leverage the AI in this case. Once you leverage the AI, then in most of the cases AI will generate the accurate unique XPath so that you can quickly start working on your scripts. Okay. But in case if AI is not able to uniquely provide a relative XPath for the element, then you can use all the concepts which we have learned throughout the series and write your own XPath and make it unique for the automation testing.